The position in front of you is equal according to the engine, but it's actually not equal. There are differences in things about it that you should understand. And if you do understand those things, you're going to be a better chess player. Okay? This is the start of a series where I'm going to be live streaming some lessons where we go through this book together. This is The Amateur's Mind by the late international master Jeremy Silman. I'm going to be explaining my thoughts as I kind of use his ideas and give my spin on it. Okay, so if you would like to follow along, there's a link in the description. You can pick up the book and join me. You don't have to have the book. I'm also just going to be sharing stuff directly on here. You can just watch the videos. Totally up to you. Okay, I think this is going to be most beneficial if you're rated between 1,000 and 1,600. But really, if you're lower than that or higher than that, there's still going to be stuff to learn. So whatever your rating is, I recommend you watch this series. Okay, hope you guys are excited. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So the first thing that I want to ask you guys, look at the position in front of you, pause the video if you would like, and think about, do you notice anything about it? Does anything jump out at you when you look at that position? Okay? And if nothing jumps out at you just yet, that's fine. By the end of this lesson, something will. But go ahead and pause and just take a look, okay? All right, so if you had a chance to do that, let me just explain to you what's the main point of this book. Okay, the main point of this book are something called imbalances in chess, okay? And the idea is that every move in a chess game gives you something and maybe you lose something. Like there's this constant tilting back and forth between you gain something from playing this move, but you lose something from playing that move. You gain something, you lose something, right? And being able to understand those imbalances in the position is a critical skill. So essentially he introduces that and then he's going to go through each of the imbalances in more depth. Okay, that's the book in a nutshell, and that's what we're going to be going through. Okay, so for this position, I'm going to actually go ahead and open it up. There are 7 major imbalances that he mentions. Okay, so I'm just going to read them off to you. Number 1, minor pieces. Okay, knights and bishops are considered minor pieces. Okay, so if you hear someone say minor pieces, they're talking about knights and bishops. Pawn structure. So how your pawns are laid out on the board. Are they connected like these are? Are they doubled or isolated or pass pawns or backward pawns? We'll talk about all that in more detail later. Space. How much space do you have to move your pieces around, right? Who has more space? So in this position, white has more space than black does. We'll talk about that more as well. Material. If you hear the word material, it means who has more pieces, right? Like if you just give away a knight for free, then your opponent has more material because you just lost a knight, right? In this position on the board, it's equal. Files and squares. So files go up and down, ranks go sideways, diagonals obviously go this way, and then key squares on the board. We'll talk more about it. Development. So if do you have your knights and bishops off of the back rank or not? Have you castled or not? Those are developing moves. And then lastly, initiative. Okay, the tempo of the game. So this one is a little tricky, but essentially if you are able to start threatening things and kind of put your opponent on the defensive and you can keep building and keep playing moves like that, that's kind of the initiative, okay? So let me go ahead, actually, let me put this on real quick. Okay. Let me go ahead and go through what he says are the imbalances in this position, okay? So I just explained to you what they are, and here we go. So number 1, for the minor pieces, black has the bishop pair. So 2 bishops against only 1 bishop for white. You might not think that that's much, but it's a small thing that you want to keep in the back of your mind. That's a small advantage for black, okay? We'll talk more about knights and bishops in a little bit as well. Pawn structure. Black has no weaknesses in their pawn structure. Everything is nice and connected. There are no isolated pawns. There's no doubled pawns. There's no real weaknesses. So that's fine. White, however, has this pawn on e5, which is kind of a weak pawn. Now, why is this pawn weak and none of the other pawns are weak? Because this one is further away from all the other ones, right? All these other pawns are close together. Pawns that are close together are very good at defending each other, right? Like all of black's pawns. This is helping these guys. If you needed to save this one, you could push it forward, or you could push this one forward. This one's kind of off by itself, right? So this is a potential target that black can keep in the back of their mind. Space. Who has more space? Well, white. White has more space. Why? Because this pawn is actually preventing black from moving forward. It's preventing the bishop from coming out. It's kind of controlling some squares. Notice that the white pieces can jump in behind it very easily. So white has more space in this position. Material's even, right? Queen for queen. There's 3 minor pieces, 2 rooks. All the pawns are equal. So the material, nobody has an advantage there. Files and squares. So the D file is open. When we say an open file, it means there's no pawns on it. But really, both players have access to this. I mean, white has the queen there, but maybe later they're going to put a rook. Black could probably castle and put their rook. That's relatively equal as far as the file is concerned. Squares, F6. The F6 square is a potential weakness for black, okay? And this is important. Whenever 2 pawns have been moved forward, they leave behind a square like this. In this case, it's the F6 square. Now, black has the bishop and the queen defending, so they're not in any immediate danger. But if for some reason or somehow this bishop gets traded for this knight, and then this knight jumps in, that could be a problem for black, and that could be a very powerful knight for white, right? So the F6 square is something you want to keep an eye on. Okay, development. White has a lead in development. So they have 3 pieces out, and they've castled. So that's like 4 developing moves to black's 2. Sometimes you could consider the queen being a developing move. So you could maybe argue that black has 3 developing moves against 4. But either way you look at it, white has a lead in development. And then the initiative. It's not really clear if anybody has the initiative here. It seems like nobody really has an initiative at this moment. All right. So those are the imbalances that you should have thought about. If you didn't, that's okay. You're just learning about this. But that's kind of the mindset. Like every time you look at a position, you don't just want to think about like, well, maybe I'll just go here and threaten checkmate. Well, maybe I'll just go here and try to trap his bishop. Well, maybe I'll just, like, first you want to step back and say, okay, hold on, let me think about the imbalances in the position and then use that to figure out what my plan should be, right? And that is essentially what he's doing there, okay? So, having said that, let's go ahead and see how this game ended up playing out. Okay, this was an actual game, and white decided to play knight to b5. Oh, and I should mention this. Sorry, one more thing. Now that we know what the imbalances are, we need to talk about what should the plans be for each side. So black's plan, if you remember, we said they had the bishop pair, which is good on an open board. And we also said this was a weakness that maybe black could take advantage of. So activating the bishops and trying to put pressure and potentially capture that weak pawn would be good plans for black. Okay, so a move like knight c6, putting pressure there makes sense. A move like queen c5. Maybe even putting the bishop on a really nice diagonal first, threatening the defender of the pawn, and then bringing your knight to d7 might be a good plan, right? All of these are ideas that would make sense for black to think about, okay? White, on the other hand, needs to try to use their knights and get them into outposts or good squares. So like, for example, maybe getting a knight here if somehow they could figure out how to trade this bishop, right? Or e4 looks like a kind of nice square. Those are the things that white needs to think about, okay? So, also white has a lead in development. So being quick to do something before black has a chance to kind of catch up also makes sense, right? So what does white do? They try to just go on the offensive right away. Now, I'd like you guys to pause. What should you play in this position as black? And this is kind of a tough question. So take your time, pause the video. What should you play here as black? All right, so I just made a point to talk about how the bishop pair is an advantage. And the move that black played in this position, and a good move, is they decided to trade it off. And this is something that is very important that you understand. So when you have an advantage in chess, just because you have something good about your position doesn't always mean you can never get rid of it. Okay? So the bishop pair, it's good. We have it. Great. Does that mean we should never trade our bishops? No. It just means if you're going to trade the bishops, you better be getting something in return, right? That's the key. That's where a lot of people go wrong. They're like, who cares about the bishops? They just trade it for a random knight, and they don't get anything in return. But in this case, black is getting something very specific in return. What are they getting? Well, for one, you had to deal with this threat. That's the first thing. If you deal with it by trying to move your pawn, that doesn't help. The knight still jumps in and you get forked. If you deal with it by trying to defend with your knight, okay, now you've put your knight on the edge of the board. Now you have other problems. Yes, you keep your bishop pair, but now you have the problem that knights are bad on the edge of the board, right? So do you really want to do that? Do you really want to play a move like queen d8, retreating your queen just to defend that pawn? Like, it's a little bit awkward. Queen c5, I guess you could consider. It looks like it gets tricky after b4. I'm not exactly sure what's happening. You'd have to kind of think through what's going on in this position. But there are some problems if you don't deal with this knight. So black says, okay, let me take it, and then play c6. And what they've done now is totally shut down this bishop. This bishop has nothing to do. I mean, look at the pawns. These pawns are amazing, controlling all these white squares, and the bishop has to leave. And it comes with a tempo. We talked about initiative, like gaining time and being able to attack your opponent, right? That's what black is doing. So they say, okay, I'm going to give up my bishop pair advantage, but now I'm going to get some initiative. And remember this weak pawn on e5 that we talked about? I'm going to be in a perfect position to follow up and start attacking it, again, with initiative. All right? So it's important that you understand why they gave up the bishop pair in that moment, right? And now this is a very, very difficult thing for white to defend. Okay? So I think white played queen d4. And here, if you want to pause, how should black continue, keeping in mind the imbalances that we already talked about? All right, well, if you said queen c5, that's a great idea, okay? Trading the queens in this position makes a lot of sense. White's queen is very powerful. It's a very active piece in the center of the board. It's controlling a lot. It's defending that e5 pawn, which is a weakness. And we haven't castled. So with queens on the board, when you haven't castled, that could potentially be a problem for your king. So trading queens going into an endgame makes a lot of sense, and black follows through with the plan. And it's kind of forcing white to make the trade. If you try to ignore it and just defend your pawn again because he was attacking it 3 times, now you can simply trade and you just win the pawn, right? So white doesn't have too many options here. They kind of have to trade. Okay, so what has happened? You've gotten rid of the queen, and white still has this weak pawn that you're going to attack, right? And the rest of the game, I'll just show you quickly. Black decided to trade the rooks. Played rook to d8, which is a great move, and I want you to think about why. So what happens if white trades this rook? What would happen over the next couple of moves? Well, hopefully you said this pawn is a goner. This pawn is going to be captured, right? White can do something, try to bring the king. You're just going to move here, and you're going to take the pawn. There's nothing that white can do to defend it, right? So when black played rook d8, this was a very strong move because white now is like, I don't really want to trade because I'm going to lose my pawn. So they have to do something like rook e1, which is what they played. But now black has gained total control over the file. Okay, and again, it all came back to that weak e5 pawn, right? Like, go back to the original position. You might not think there's much going on here. And yet, by recognizing those imbalances that we've played like how many moves now, and every one of black's decisions has been based on the fact that they're going to try to attack that weak spot. And this lines up totally with what's going on in the position. And generally, when your plans line up with what the position is telling you should do, they're going to work out, right? The problem that a lot of people have, and I've done this myself as well, is you choose a plan that the position really doesn't line up with, right? Like, I'm going to just attack the king because I just like to attack, right? So like back in this position, let's say like right here, black's like, I just like to attack. And they just start pushing these pawns forward. You could do that, right? Like you could do that. But is the position really telling you to do that? Probably not. Your king's in the center. I think you have to be really careful with the D file here if you start pushing these pawns and you let white get a bunch of pieces here. So if you do some random stuff like that, it's probably not going to turn out as well as if you follow the plan of what the position is telling you. And here we are. Black has really made some progress, and they have a nice position. Okay? And the game went on. I won't show you all of this because it's kind of a little bit irrelevant, but eventually they got into this position. Same idea, right? They have all their pieces lined up attacking that weak spot. White is just tied down defending. White can't really do anything because if they ever move these pieces away, they're going to lose a pawn, right? And black went on to win this game, even though it took some time. Okay? So understanding the imbalances gives you a clue as to what your plans should be. Cool. So that's kind of the main first point that we're going to talk about. Imbalances. I listed out what the 7 were, and that was a good example of how you could use them. Okay. Now, we get to move on to the next section, which is where he talks about knights and bishops. By the way, if you're just joining, we're going through this book, The Amateur's Mind, by International Master Jeremy Silman. And yeah, let's keep going. All right, so I have another example for you guys. Let me go ahead and pull it up over here. So what I'm going to do now, and what he does in the book, is he mentions 10 rules. Okay, rules about knights and bishops that you want to remember. Okay, and if you remember these are going to help you as you make decisions related to the knights and the bishops. So you remember there were 7 imbalances, and one of them was minor pieces, knights and bishops. Okay, so that's why we're going to be talking about that for the next portion of this lesson. All right. Rule number 1: bishops and knights are both worth 3 points. Okay. Now, he makes a point to mention that bishops are not better than knights, which is funny because he also makes the opposite argument throughout the book, that bishops are better than knights. So his point is, it depends on the position. Okay, bishops can be better than knights if certain conditions are met. But if not, then they're not going to be better. Okay, so you don't want to automatically assume that bishops are better than knights unless you are able to use them in a particular way, which we're going to talk more about in just a second. Okay, so in this particular position, white's going forward. White has an extra pawn. Okay, there's 5 pawns against 4 pawns. It's white's turn, and they're totally losing. Why? Because this bishop is awful. It's stuck behind the pawns. It can't go anywhere except over here, which does nothing to help you. It doesn't really matter what you do. You can move. Black's going to move. You have to move back. He jumps in. He's going to take this pawn. He's going to move his knight. He's going to get a queen, and black wins. Very silly example, right? But it illustrates the point. You can't just always say bishops are better than knights. No, it depends on the position. That's the correct answer. It depends, okay? And here's a good example of how the knight outperforms the bishop, all right? So they're equal, but there are certain things that make them better, which we'll talk about, okay? Rule number 2, bishops are better in open positions where pawns don't block their diagonals, okay? In this position, you can see that's not what's happening here, all right? There are pawns blocking the diagonals, which is why the bishop is so bad, okay? So they're better in open positions. Rule number 3, bishops are very strong in endgames that have pawns on both sides of the board, particularly pass pawns on both sides of the board. Okay, so let me show you another example here. All right, this one. So in this position, it's white to play. White's pawns are going forward. And you can see from the eval bar, black is winning. It's kind of a silly example, but it also illustrates a very important point. This bishop is amazing, right? This bishop is amazing, stopping all 5 pawns at the same time and supporting this pawn to become a queen, all at the same time, something that this knight, which is stuck in the corner, cannot do. Okay, so just silly example, like I said, to illustrate a point. If there are pawns on both sides of the board in an endgame, bishop is probably going to be much more powerful than a knight. Okay. What's up, Steven? Good to see you here. So yeah, it doesn't matter what you do with white here. You can try to bring your knight in. It's too slow. Black's just going to push and get a queen. You can't do anything about it. And pushing any of your pawns doesn't really help you. The bishop's always just going to take them. Okay. All right. So that was rule number 3. Rule number 4, and I have another example for you. Let me go ahead and pull this one up. Rule number 4, bad bishops are bishops that have pawns on the same color in the center of the board, okay? So if you look at the center of the board, kind of this area, basically, these pawns are on the same color as the bishop. So this would be considered a bad bishop. So actually, I'm going to go back to the analysis board. Generally speaking, when you see this, it looks something like this, okay? You've got the same color pawns as your bishop. This is a bad bishop. Because it's stuck and can't really do much, okay? So generally speaking, you want to avoid that, okay? And he lists 3 things that you need to do if you have a bad bishop. Number 1, trade it for a piece of equal value, okay? So for example, if black goes here and somehow gives you an opportunity to trade it, this is probably a good decision. Go ahead and trade that bishop off for the knight. Number 2, get the pawns off the color of your bishop. So like, at some point, if you can play d4, maybe not now because you're losing a pawn, but at some point you play d4, you've fixed your problem. It's no longer a bad bishop. And number 3, if you can get it outside of the pawn chain, you're going to be fine. Okay, so for example, here, this is not so bad. though it's technically, according to his definition of bad bishop, it's outside the pawn chain, you're going to be just fine. Brings us back to our example, okay? So in this example, technically, this would be considered a bad bishop because the pawns are on the same color. And this would be considered a good bishop because the pawns are not on the color. And yet, white's bishop is the one that's doing an amazing job, right? So, and he makes a really good point, I think, that these are rules and these are guidelines, but there's always going to be those exceptions. So just because the definition would tell you it's a bad bishop, if your bishop is doing something valuable, it's fine. Forget about it. Like, who cares? It's great. Don't worry about it. Okay. So that's kind of what this example is illustrating. This is an amazing bishop, outperforming this bishop. What's up, Rob? Good to see you. Okay, let's keep going. We did rule number 4. Rule number 5. He talks about how the main weakness of a bishop, okay, is that it is stuck on the same color for the entire game. So this bishop is stuck on these squares. And actually, I'm going to pull up another position for you. It's going to illustrate this a little bit better. Okay. This position, white's going forward. Is there a way to win? Is there a way to win with white? The answer is no. There's nothing you can do because you can never make these pieces leave. The bishop can just move back and forth all game. You can never make him leave. Why? Because this bishop is useless. This bishop is not doing anything. It's stuck on the light squares. And because of that, black just sits here with the blockade. You can't do anything. It's a draw. Okay? However, if we were to change this position to the following, I'll jump over here and do. Okay, so I want you to look carefully and notice what I've done. Here's the first position. Here's the next position. I've just added a bishop to both sides. So the material doesn't change as far as like who has more pieces or pawns. But because white now has a piece that can control the dark squares, we go from a drawn position to a one position instantly. It's immediately a win for white. You play bishop check, the king has to move, then you can start pushing your pawns. Now you have a winning position. So his point in rule number 5 is that a bishop's weakness is that it's stuck on the same color square, but having both bishops negates that. Okay, you no longer have that same weakness because you have a piece that can control the other square, right? Makes sense. So that's why when we talk about the bishop pair being very powerful, that's one of the reasons. Okay? All right, let's keep going. Rule number 6. Knights love closed positions with locked pawns. This one is relatively straightforward. I think most people know this, but let me show you an example here. This position, black's knight is absolutely a monster. Okay, it's a closed position. The pawns are pretty much blockaded. There's not much for this bishop to do. You can't really get through. The knight cannot be chased away because it has an outpost, which I believe is one of the other. Yeah, we're coming to that rule later, but it's on an outpost. It can't be chased away by the pawns. It's hitting these targets. It's just an amazing piece, right? And this is a good example of how the knight is better than the bishop in this position. Okay, well, let's keep going. Rule number 7 basically says knights are better in the center of the board. Okay, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Let me show you why. So a bishop has the ability to go from one side of the board all the way to the other immediately. It only takes one move and you can just get over there, right? A knight can't do that. If this knight on this side, in this corner, wants to go to the other corner, you have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It takes at least 3 or 4 moves to get over in that vicinity, right? Same thing. If you're here and you want to get to the other side of the board, 1, 2, it takes you 3 moves to get into the action where you can do something, right? So knights from the center, they're only like 2 moves from anything really, right? If you want to go this way, fine, 1, 2. You want to go down? Okay, 1, 2. We're down. You want to go to the right? 1, 2. So you're pretty close to wherever you need to go from the center, right? Which is very good for the knight. So that's one thing. And the other thing is they just control more squares. So I'm going to put 2 knights on the board. And look at this one. It controls 4 squares. And look at this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right? You just better. In the corner, 2 squares, 8 squares. Here, 3 squares, 8 squares, right? So towards the center, they control more. Okay? Yeah. So knights are better in the center. And then there's another rule. Knights on the rim are dim. That's why. Okay? Okay, rule number 8. Knights need outposts. Okay, so back to this other example that we were looking at. This is an example of an outpost. An outpost is a square on the board that cannot be attacked by your opponent's pawn. So let me actually flip this from black. So we're looking at this from black's perspective. So white's pawn on the d file has been pushed here, so it cannot attack us. And the other pawn that could potentially attack us is blockaded by our own pawn. So because of that, this is a beautiful square that is an outpost for our knight where he can just sit and be happy and cause problems for our opponent, and we don't have to worry about anything. Okay, great. Let me ask you this. Where are some other good outposts on the board for our knight in this position? What do you think? Well, hopefully you said c3. That looks like a pretty nice square if we could get our knight there. a3, d4, right? These are all good outposts. And by the way, I should mention f4 is not an outpost. Why? Because f4, white could simply play g3, chase us away, and then we have to move. It's not the same as these squares, okay? Now, you can't always get your knight to a good outpost, right? Like in this case, c3 looks amazing, but I can't get there. I can't go there. I can't go there. I wouldn't be able to go to these squares together. I just can't get there right now. And that's you know, sometimes that happens. You have to kind of use what you can. In this case, c5 was very easy to get to, so that's what black is doing, which is fine, right? Use what you can. But you want to be constantly keeping an eye out for that. And like, for example, in this position, if white's pawn was on d4, and as soon as they moved to d5, that would be, if I'm black, like, oh, they just created an outpost for my knight on c5. Let me move it there. Okay? Now, I want to do something. Let me go back here for a second. And what I'm going to do for this is make a list of knights, a line of knights. And Silman talks about something that I thought was really cool. He lists the effectiveness of knights on each rank of a chessboard. And this is something that I kind of intuitively kind of knew, but I never really thought about it like this, and I thought it was cool. So knights on the first rank, he says, are very defensive. That's pretty much all they do. They're just a defender defending against something. They're not going to be aggressive and help you attack, just defending. Not really that great. Knights on the second rank, also a defensive piece, and are considered worse than a bishop. Okay, so if your opponent has a bishop somewhere on the board, like, and you're comparing this knight to that bishop, your knight's going to be worse, right? It's still in a defensive position. His bishop's probably going to be better. Okay, a knight on the third rank, he says, serves many defensive functions, and it's ready to jump further up the board at a moment's notice. So the third rank is where it's like, okay, now the knight is starting to be more equal to the bishop, right? Because you one move and you're ready to attack. You're also defending some things, probably. Like, the third rank is pretty good. Fourth rank, if it's securely placed, he says, and that's important, is considered to be fully equal to a bishop. So we've talked about how bishops are maybe slightly better than knights. Not true if your knight gets to the fourth rank and it's defended. Okay, remember, that means there's no pawns that are just sitting waiting to chase it away. Okay, so maybe that's because the pawns have already been pushed past, right? So this square is a good outpost now. Maybe it's because you've got those squares controlled with your own pawns, for example, right? If these try to push forward, we would take them. So in this case, okay, this is a pretty secure square for our knight, right? So fourth rank, you're doing well. The knight is equal to the bishop. A knight on the fifth rank, let me move these pawns so it doesn't get captured. A knight on the fifth rank is a powerful attacking piece and usually is considered better, stronger than the bishop. Okay, so now the knight is really ready to threaten some things in your opponent's camp, jump around to wherever it needs to. Knight on the fifth rank is powerful. Okay, and the sixth rank is kind of the dream spot for the knight. If you get a knight to the 6th rank and it's, let's just say, defended with the pawn, and maybe black's pawns have already been pushed forward so they can't attack you, this is amazing. This knight is going to be so powerful. I mean, you could even just see how it's attacking all these squares in the enemy camp. It's blocking off this file. If there was a rook sitting there, it wouldn't be able to do anything. That knight on the 6th rank is amazing. Okay? So if you can get that in a game, like, you should do it. And he says, like, a lot of times your opponent's going to have to just sacrifice a rook for that knight or something to get rid of it. It's amazing. And it's going to be much better than the bishop. Okay? So 6th rank. And then, excuse me. Interesting thing happens. The 7th and the 8th rank, it's kind of a case of diminishing returns, where they're not really going to be as good probably as the knight on the 6th rank. And it makes sense, right? Like, this knight controls more squares. Well, that's one thing. These don't control as many squares. And it's just, yeah, like, it's really probably not even worth it unless there's a specific reason to even move it forward. So just getting your knight to the 6th rank is kind of ideal. Okay? So I thought that was really interesting, just kind of hearing the differences between the knights on different ranks of the board. Okay, so maybe just keep that in mind as you're playing your games and look for those opportunities to create those outposts for your knights further and further up the board, with the 6th rank kind of being the dream, if you can get it. Okay. All right, let's keep going. We have a couple more rules before we get to do something really interesting. I'm excited to share with you guys. So, rule number 9, knights are better than bishops in endgames with pawns on only one side of the board. So we already talked about how bishops are good when there's pawns on both sides. If there's only pawns on one side of the board, generally the knight is going to be better. Let me show you an example. Let me come over here. Okay. So in this, and of course, these examples are handpicked, obviously, to prove the point, but this knight is amazing. The bishop is positioned well, but the knight is just really powerful. It can jump around from different color squares, which the bishop cannot do, so that's an advantage. And because it has this nice outpost, it's just a very powerful piece, and black is winning in this position. Now, you put a couple pawns over here, totally changes, right? Because then you can see, like, then the bishop's going to be supporting over there, and at the same time defending over here. Totally different story, right? But in this position with only pawns here, black is better, okay? And rule number 10 is from the first official world chess champion, Steins, and this is important. This is a very good one, okay? So pay attention to this one. The way to beat knights is to deprive them of any advanced support points, is what he calls it. Essentially, he's saying deprive them of outposts, okay? So let me see if I have an example. Well, not exactly, but I'll just do it this way. If my knight wants to jump in here and black plays d5, d4, f5, they've just made me very happy, right? Thank you very much. I've got this amazing square for my knight. Your pawns can no longer, do that. So if you're playing as black, maybe a better move, and I'm just going to do something silly here, but d6. Okay, I've deprived you of that square. You have no outpost that you can jump into, right? As the game goes on, this is, like I said, a silly example, but as the game goes on, those are the kind of things you want to be paying attention to with knights. If you can stop the knights from getting nice, solid outposts, they're not going to be nearly as effective, okay? So keep that in mind. That's what Steins said was rule number 10. Okay. Now we're going to do something really interesting, and I like how Silman did this in the book. So I'm going to give you guys a position, and this is going to be interactive. You're going to get to pause the video here and think a little bit. So get ready. I'm going to give you guys a position. So let me go ahead and put it in here. I believe it's this. Okay. Very good. So this is the position. I think black has just played knight to b6. And it is white to play. What I would like you guys to do is pause the video and think through what would you do? It's your turn, white to play. Here's the position. What would you do and why? Okay, just go ahead and pause, think through that, and then we will pick up with the rest of the lesson, okay? All right. Hopefully you guys had a chance to pause and think through that. So this is a good example of how you can think about the imbalances and then use them to your advantage. Now, Silman actually played this position in a game, and he won it in a nice way, which we will see in just a second. But then what he did was he gave this same exact position to 3 of his students, okay? The students were rated 1,000, 1,200, and 1,600 ELO, and he had them think through what they thought about the position, and then he had them play it against himself. So he played with black, and he had them play with white to see what they would do. And he kind of wrote down in the book like what they thought about. Okay, really interesting idea, and I love this. So that's what we're going to do. And I actually, in the book, he shows you his game first. I think we're going to wait. I think we're going to start with the students' games. We're going to see what they thought about, and then I'm going to show you what Silman did, following kind of the principles that we've already talked about. Okay, so what I'm going to do, let's start with the 1,000 rated player. Okay, so let me go ahead and pull up a new one here. I believe if I did this correctly, here we go. All right, and if you're wondering, just go ahead. This is how the game unfolded. Okay, so we had this weird kind of Catalan chasing the queen around. Don't worry too much about this. It's not important that you really understand all this. Just want to get to the position. He trades the bishop, attacks, e4, queen e7, queen e2, trades here, e5, and knight b6. Okay, so this is the same position that I just showed you, but this is how we ended up here. Now, the game that I'm about to show you from here on out was played by his 1,000 rated student, okay? And I'm going to just read you some of what the 1,000 rated player said when they initially looked at the position, okay? White's king is a bit open, so I prefer black's position. First thing he noticed was that White's king's position is open. He prefers black's position. And Silman actually talks about this later, and he says, like, that's not really true. Like, White's king is fine. There's no, I mean, yes, it's a little bit open, but there's no way that these pieces can launch an attack. So that was kind of like, you don't even need to worry about that. That is not really important, right? Black's e-pawn is potentially weak. Okay, that's what this player thought about. The main imbalance is a bishop versus a knight. Okay, so he did identify something here, which is very good. The imbalance was a bishop versus a knight. Cool. I'd like to control a file. He wants to get his pieces out. He wants to get his knight to d5. So he's thinking about bishop g5. Okay, but this knight is controlling d5, he says. And then he says, maybe I should play like a3 and b4 and put my bishop over here as a kind of plan to add pressure on e5. Okay, and that's essentially what this 1,000 rated player ends up doing. He's like, yeah, let me do that. So he plays the move a3. Now, it's not a blunder per se, but he's already going down the wrong path. Okay, he's not recognizing one of the rules that we talked about directly applies to this position, and he's not catching it. All right, we're going to come back to that in just a second. So let's see what happens. So rook comes over. He follows with his plan. He plays b4. This trade happens. Now he's defending his knight, and all of a sudden he's already on the defensive, reacting to what black is doing, right? Attacks it again. He defends. Attacks it again. And by the way, do you notice this c4 square? Do you see what this is? This is an outpost. He played b4. There are no pawns that can control this square. This is an amazing square for black's knight, and black is taking advantage of it. And white has already kind of lost their advantage. And then a few moves later, they end up blundering. Here they played knight e2. Why is it a blunder? Oh, it just hangs a pawn, I guess. The engine is telling me there's something wrong with just taking the pawn, although I don't exactly see Knight c3. So, some engine line is there, but essentially you lost a pawn, and he's already kind of, pieces are on the defensive. He's already gone down the wrong path. Okay, that's the 1,000 rated player. Okay, so he did some things good, right? At the initial position, he did recognize that there was a knight and a bishop imbalance, but he didn't know how to make use of it, right? He was just like, well, I don't know. I'll just like start pushing some pawns over here and put my bishop here, right? So let's keep going. Let's see how some of these other players played. Okay, next we're going to look at the 1,600 rated players game. Okay, so let me pull up this one. 1,600 rated player. We'll see what they thought about the game as well. All right, so again, exact same game. Okay, I'm going to get to the same position. Right here. Okay. 1,600. I like knight to d5. If he takes, I have a strong passed pawn. I want to get my bishop into play. He thinks about f4, but then he's thinking his king is getting too open. He's thinking about queen b5 to attack this e5 pawn. And then he decides, you know what, let me go with the pin to get more control over the d5 square. So the thing that the 1,600 rated player does that's good is he chooses a plan which kind of makes sense with the position. He's trying to get to the d5 square with his knight, and then he sticks with it. And all of his moves are kind of coordinated towards that end. This is my plan. I'm going to stick with it, and I'm going to go make this happen, right? Which is good. And Silman points out something here that, let me see if I highlighted this. Yeah, basically he said something along the lines of like, it's better to have a plan, even if it's not the best plan. But if you have a solid plan and you stick with it and your moves are related to that, that's good. So that's what the 1,600 rated player does. He plays bishop g5. Okay, he wants to jump his knight in. Black plays rook f to d8. He trades. He brings the other rook over. He trades and he trades. So all of his logic so far is like, let's get rid of the rooks so they can't stop me. And now I'm going to jump in here with d5 at the right time. And he thinks now is the right moment. And this is, this is a solid option, right? Because if black does take, he's now created himself a passed pawn, and maybe with the help of the queen somehow this could be very dangerous, right? So not a bad plan. Queen comes over and he plays queen b5, and he's continuing to defend and keep that strong knight on d5, which is lining up with everything that he thought about, right? King f8, and he takes just because he wanted to double up these pawns. And Silman makes an interesting point here. He says you have to basically avoid giving up something that's very powerful for something that's like, yeah, it's okay, right? So white did all this work to get this strong knight in the center so that if this happens, he's going to get this passed pawn. And then at this point, he's like, oh, you know what? Doubled pawns, I'm going to do it. Okay, sure, you doubled his pawns, but do you have an easy way to attack them? I mean, not really. They're already attacked. It's already defended. You're not going to be able to put pressure on that pawn anymore. There's no way. You can't get your king over here to attack it, right? So you have to be careful giving up something powerful for something that's like, yeah, maybe, right? And that's where the 1,600 went wrong. And then I think he ended up blundering the next move. Yeah, he played queen d5. Can you guys identify why that is a blunder? Why is this move a blunder? That's the question. All right, well, if you had a chance to think about that, hopefully you noticed that after black takes, you're not going to be able to defend your pawn. And you might say, wait a second, don't I have two moves? He has two moves. Looks like I can defend it, right? No, because of this move, f5 stops your king from getting there. And next move, black's going to come up and take you. g4, you could try with g6. And there's no way for you to get there. You simply lose your pawn. And once you lose this pawn, now you're going to lose the game because now black's going to be the one who's going to be able to create a passed pawn. By the way, this is good to know. He's going to push these to create a passed pawn, use it as a decoy, run his king over here, take these, and then either win with these or again, use it as decoy, take that one. Lots of ways, but it's a winning position for black. Okay. So the 1,600, did some things right? Like they identified a nice plan and they, for the most part, stuck with it until they got distracted with the knight takes b6 later. But that was at least something. Okay. Let's look at one more player. This is a 1200 rated player that I'm going to show you now. Let me grab this game. 1200 rated player. Okay. And let's see what they did. All right. So again, same exact game. We get to the same exact moment right here. And let's see what do they decide to do. And actually, it's very similar to what the 1600 said. They noticed the d5 square and they wanted to do that. So they played bishop g5. h6. And this is really interesting. So pay attention here, guys, because this is something that happens all the time, I think, in beginner and intermediate players. You pin a knight, your opponent plays h6, and then you're like, what do I do now? Should I take? Should I go back? Oh, this is an annoying move. Man, someone makes a very, very good point. If you're going to play bishop g5 and pin a knight, you need to know ahead of time what you're going to do if they play h6. Like, this is such an obvious response. You need to know what you're going to do. And if you don't have a good thing, don't play there. Play a different move, right? Don't go there and then, well, hopefully I'll figure something out later if they play that. No. Think about it first and figure out what you're going to do, okay? So basically, you would either only go there if you're intending to trade, or if you're able to go back and you don't think they're going to be able to push because it's going to weaken their king or whatever. But in this case, you can't go back. He's just going to trap your bishop, right? And you lose a piece. So you don't want that. So you either have to waste your time and go back, or you have to trade it, which should have already been decided before you move there. That's the key point, right? So this person didn't think it through, and then at this point, after h6, they're like, what do I do now? They decided to take, and then they played knight to d5. Okay, so they're kind of sticking with the plan, which is good. And then they take with the rook. I think, personally, I would have maybe tried to get the, sorry about that. I would have tried to get the pass pawn. But they kind of switched their plan, and then they said, you know what, now let me double up, and maybe I'll attack here. And they're kind of a little bit all over the place is what was happening in this game. They did bring the rook over, brought the queen over. And let me see if there's anything else I wanted to mention about this one. Oh, yes. Okay, sorry, I skipped it. I need to talk about this. So right at this moment, after black played f6, the 1200 rated player was writing down some things he was thinking about. I'm going to read some of this to you, okay? He's lined up his king and his queen on the a2, g8 diagonal, which is alarming. But if queen c4, I don't have any threats. How can I get to his king? I can play rook d6 and chase the queen away, and then I could check him with my queen. But he has queen f7 to just stay on that diagonal. My original plan was to place all my pieces on the file. He could challenge me with rook to d8. I'm looking at queen h5 and then maybe bringing my rook to d6. My queen should be pretty safe there. And that's when he plays queen h5. Okay, now, a couple of things wrong with the thought process, right? What's wrong with this thought process? Well, number one, he's thinking about checkmating the king, but black's king is not weak. I mean, there's nothing about this position that would tell you like, oh yeah, you can just go and checkmate his king. I mean, even if you try to invade here, there's always going to be rook f7 to just counter you. The queen is in a good position to help defend. I mean, it's just, but that's what he's thinking about, not really what's going on with the position. That's the first thing. The second thing, he mentioned he could play a move like rook d6. He was just forgetting totally about this pawn, right? Like, that's just a free pawn, and black could just take it. He didn't even really mention that or notice that. The other thing, he said black could play rook d8 to counter. Black cannot play rook d8. You just lose a rook. So that's not applicable in the position. So you can see how there's some errors in his thinking, which is a big deal. And, I would say you can think about these imbalances and these principles all you want, but if you're just missing little details like that, you're not going to get very far. So it's important that you really pay attention to the details, right? Like, I think he's going to counter me on the d file. Is that even possible? You need to make sure that you notice, like, no, wait a second, he can't even go there. I want to move my rook here. Wait a second, I just lose a pawn, right? You have to catch those details, and this player was kind of missing some of those. Okay, so that's kind of one of the key things here that you should pay attention to. So he goes with queen h5. Black plays rook over. He attacks the queen, like we talked about, forgetting about the pawn. He ends up losing it. Now he goes on the 7th rank. And he actually has an opportunity here. Black messes up in this position. If you want to pause, this is a good moment. There is a winning move for white that this player did not find. They actually played something quickly, which was the wrong move. But what do you guys think the winning move is? Okay, lots of people are saying queen g6. Some people said rook g7. Okay. So, funny thing, queen g6 is what the person played. They played it quickly, and it's not the right move. Why not? Well, the idea is you want to checkmate. Cool. The problem is black has an easy way to defend. And remember, the queen is still defending. It defends the checkmate, defends here. You don't have anything now. There's nothing to follow up here, right? So what's the winning move? Queen g4. Why? Well, you're still threatening checkmate, which is a big deal. But now, do you notice the difference? The queen is not on g6, it's on g4, which means it's lined up with the rook. So now you can trade, and guess what? You win a free rook. So it's important when you do have a good position that you are careful and that you make sure you play the best move and not just the first move that pops into your head, like in this case, queen g6, right? So your thought process should be something like, okay, I could go with queen g6 to threaten checkmate. I could also go queen g4 to threaten checkmate. I should calculate both of those just to make sure I choose the best option. And yes, there's something to be said about getting your queen close to your opponent's king. That's generally a good thing. But there's also something to be said about lining up on diagonals and files with other pieces. And sometimes that opens up more tactical opportunities for you than just this move. Okay, so kind of a tricky position. And you could see why this 1200 rated player, missed it, right? And they played just queen g6. And then ended up blundering, I think, right here. What would you play, actually? Let me ask you, what would you play in this position? We'll see if you guys would play the same move that this 1200 rated player played. All right. If you had a chance to think about that, basically any move with your rook back here is fine. The only bad move really is rook takes f8. That's what was played. Why is it such a bad move? You are trading off and going into the end game where black has an extra pawn. They have 2 against 1. They're going to be able to push these. This is also a weakness. But even if it wasn't, they're going to be able to push, get a pass pawn. It's not going to be good to trade, right? So you want to keep your rook. This is a nice active place for it. Even going back is probably okay somewhere. But trading was just a bad decision. And then, black is going to win this game. Okay, so before you trade into further in the end game, you really want to check the pawns, right? Generally speaking, if you're down pawns, trading pieces only is going to make your life harder. So just keep that in mind. Okay, if it was equal, all right, then fine. You want to trade, no worries. Actually, rook d7, black has to stop you, and then you can just go check, and you can just get a forced draw, actually, if you want. Okay, so depending on who you're playing. Okay, so we looked at 3 games, guys. We looked at 3 games from a 1,000 rated player, a 1,600 rated player, and a 1,200 rated player, and we saw how they were thinking about the position. Now, we are going to go back one more time, and this time, I'm going to show you how Jeremy Silman, international master, would have played, or how he did play the position, okay? So, let me go ahead and pull this up. All right, so it's going to be same exact game that we looked at. I'm going to get to the same exact position. All right, you should be very familiar with this by now. Here we go. Knight goes to b6. Now, this time, it's the international master playing with the white pieces. Let's watch what he does, okay? Let's watch what he does. Oh, and the first thing that he mentions, um, well, let me actually ask you guys this. I mentioned 10 rules, okay, related to knights and bishops already, previously in the live stream. Which rule jumps out at you in this position after you see the move knight to b6? There should be one rule in particular that jumps out at you. Can anybody tell me what it is? Can anybody tell me which rule should jump out at you? Exactly. Nicholas is the first player to get it correct. Rule number 10 from Stites. He said you have to control the outpost of your opponent's knights. So this knight, do you remember the game where the other player played a3 and b4? And the knight ended up jumping in and just controlling the game? He gave him this outpost, right? So which move should be jumping out in your mind as a potentially good move? b3. b3 should be a great move because you stop the knight. You stop the knight's outposts. And you could also probably put your bishop there and line up on the pawn. That looks pretty nice. Right? Exactly. Exactly. Now, in the game, Silman delayed it a little bit. But he was keeping that in his mind, and it did happen at some point. So in the game, he played bishop e3. Sorry. He played bishop e3. Rook d8. He brought his queen to a really aggressive square, putting pressure here and controlling a lot of stuff. And now Black is threatening to go there. He plays b3. Okay? And it's a good example of how, like, there's different ways to use these principles and these imbalances, but knowing them and understanding them is going to put you on the right path, even if it maybe looks slightly different from one player to another player, right? Like, if it was me playing this game, I probably would have thought about b3 right away and put my bishop on b2 and continued the game this way. Silman decides to go for bishop e3, queen b5, and then b3. But he's still using that same concept of controlling the knight's advanced outposts and not allowing them to get there, right? And that's how he gets into a great position. Okay, so h6 was played. He plays a4, nice follow-up move. He's going to play a5, and guess what? You could kind of consider this another outpost that the knight has that you're going to take away once you get your pawn to a5. Not only have you controlled all of these squares, but now you're pushing even further and taking away another one, right? And controlling those knights, he's really focusing in on the bishop against the knight advantage that he has, and he's using, the way he's doing that is by controlling those outposts. You guys see how that works? So there's a trade. The rook comes over. He defends his knight. It was under attack. Okay. And I guess Black just blundered the pawn. But their position was already kind of looking bad anyway. Even if you played a better move, it's still very good for white. But he ends up blundering the pawn. And there's some tactics here that ultimately lead to a win for Silman. Okay? Winning position. The tactics at the end don't really matter. That's not the point. The point is he recognized the imbalance of bishop against knight, and he used the rule of controlling the outposts and playing b3 at the right moment to just totally take control of the position. Okay? So, yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I hope you guys could appreciate that too. We had the exact same position, right? And we saw how 3 lower rated players, 1,000, 1,200, 1,600 played. And then we saw how an international master played. And the major difference was that he understood those imbalances and the other players did not. Or let me rephrase that. Even when the other players kind of understood some of it, they didn't know how to best make use of it, right? Like some of the other players said, like, well, I have a bishop against a knight. I should be able to do something. I have this d5 square. I should be able to do something. But it didn't work out in practice, and they kind of missed this detail about controlling the knight's outpost. Okay? Nathan asks a really good question. He says, when you play a move like b3, how much do you have to worry about the knight repositioning and leaving your pawn out of place? Yeah, it's a very good question. Here is what I would say. Number one, in this particular position, we have the bishop on the opposite color of these pawns. So that means that immediately after the pawn moves forward, the bishop is always going to be ready, if we need it, to fill in those gaps. So that's one reason why I would immediately consider b3. Okay. The other reason, and the other point to your question is like, he's kind of asking about like, what about this square, right? We've opened up this square. Can the knight now somehow maybe get there or here, right? And yes, but generally speaking, that's going to take time. So you need to think through like how quickly is that going to happen? How much time is it going to take? And does your opponent have that time available? Because like, yeah, you could say like, okay, they're going to now go one, well, how do we even get here? Like, it's not that easy. I guess you have to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Could they do that? Well, maybe, but it doesn't seem very likely in this position that that's going to happen. And even if they did, they couldn't get to this square because we have that controlled. So I'm not really seeing how they could take advantage of it, right? So generally speaking, it's okay if that's the answer. Now, I'll show you one thing that might be kind of interesting on that note. So there is a line. I've been playing the French defense, thanks to Grandmaster Avo here. There's this line where we bring out our knight, and then once they push, we go back. It's like, what in the world? Why do we do that for, right? Well, it's kind of to Nathan's point. Now that they've pushed, this square on f5 suddenly is much more attractive to our knight, right? When the pawn's on e4, it's controlling there. We can't go there. But as soon as they push, now we can. And going back is the quickest path to get there. You say, what about g4? Well, first of all, g4 is very weakening on the king side, so there's other problems. But also, a lot of times we have this really nice idea of h5. And if they take, again, the f5 square is available. We can jump in. There's more going on here, which I'm not going to get into. But just in general, this is kind of what you remember. We have the f5 square. And they can't play h3 because there's always going to be a pin. Nice little thing to keep in the back of your mind. The other thing is sometimes you can put the knight there. And then if you're worried about g4 happening, you can play h5 to stop that. Okay? Sorry, I didn't mean to resize the board. I don't know why that keeps happening. Okay. So yeah, very good question from Nathan. Very good question. Yes, and if you just joined, I will repeat the 10 rules quickly, okay? Number 1, bishops and knights are both worth 3 points. Number 2, bishops are better in open positions. Number 3, bishops are very strong in endgames where there's passed pawns on both sides of the board. Rule number 4, bad bishops have central pawns that are on the same color. So you should do one of 3 things. Either trade your bishop, move the pawns, or get it outside of the pawn chain if you can. Rule number 5, the bishop pair negates the weakness of one color that bishops have. So one bishop can only control half the squares on a chessboard, but when you have both bishops, that weakness kind of goes away. Rule number 6, knights love closed positions with locked pawns. Rule number 7, knights are better in the center. Rule number 8, knights need outposts like this on f5 to be effective. Rule number 9, knights are better than bishops in endgames with pawns on only one side of the board. And rule number 10, and the one that was critical in this game that we looked at with where Silman was playing, this is what the world champion Steintz recommended, was that you need to take away the advanced outposts of your opponent's knights, okay, which is what b3 does. This is a very common actual move. When a knight lands on b6 or g6, just pushing that pawn up is a very simple and easy solution. It actually can happen in a lot of situations. Like, if my opponent plays this, and I'm just like totally stumped at like, what is even happening? What should I play? Guess what? C6 can't be a bad move because you just kind of shut out the knight's outposts, right? Now, I would be careful with f6 only because the weakness is on your king. But as far as the knights are concerned, it's a good move, right? It controls the knight. So just something to think about. Okay, guys. I believe, let me see. Yeah, I believe that is all that I was going to cover for part 1. Okay, we'll do this again in the future. we'll have another live lesson. Well, part 2 will continue on. There's more examples and more things about knights and bishops, and then we'll start to jump into some of the other imbalances. So if you remember, minor pieces was only the first imbalance that we talked about, knights and versus bishops. But there's a lot of other ones like space and pawn control, pawn structure, and initiative and material and all different things. Okay, so we will talk about those as well. So I'm going to open it up to questions that, if you want to ask, now would be the time. And I'll just close it out with a few questions. All right, guys? How much do you think it helps to be good at notation? As far as being a good chess player, it doesn't really matter, but it does make your learning process easier. So when you're reading a book, when you're listening to someone talk and somebody says, yeah, knight f3, I'm worried about knight f3, knight g5, you know what they're talking about quickly, as opposed to like, wait, knight f3, where's knight f3? It just kind of like, it's a barrier to learning more stuff. So that's why I would say it helps. How often do I do live lessons? I don't do them often. This is kind of a new thing I'm going to try to do a little bit more of. When's the next tournament? Very soon. I'll just say very soon. All right, so stay tuned. Stay tuned. When is chest vibes coming back? That's a good question. I'm still working on that. Still working on the chest muscles. Did I get recognized and approached by fans at the tournament? Yes, Rob, a few. Yeah, I mean, not like it wasn't like people were swarming to see me, but yes, I did see some people here and there. Yeah. Yes, Nathan, I'm gonna try to go through all of it unless for some reason I can't keep up with it, but that's the plan. More games versus donators again. Maybe at some point, not right now. That'll be down the road probably. Aside from your course, any other good resources for learning the middle game? Middle game, yeah. So first of all, make sure you're good at your tactics because tactics pop up all over the place in the middle game. So if you're not good at tactics, you're going to be missing opportunities. From a positional standpoint, I have a couple videos where I've talked about positional concepts. So search for like positional. I forget what the titles of the videos are, but just search on the channel. You'll see them. Some of those are nice. Also, we did a series, Logical Chess, move by move. If you haven't watched that one, highly recommend that, where we went through the book. Lots of middle game concepts and ideas are explained there. I think that'll be really helpful. I assume that the ratings were OTB ratings, but I'm not sure if you mentioned that in the book. I'm not sure about that one. How do you master the coordinates on the board? Yeah, you just have to practice. Just test yourself a lot. So like, I'm pretty sure the king is on the E file, right? Oh yeah, it's the E file. Okay, I think the queen's on the D file. Yeah, D file. Okay. And then when I bring out my bishops, is it what? Oh, it's G4 if I'm black. Okay, and it's B4. And then you'll get used to the fact, okay, it's G5 when I'm white, and it's B5 when I'm okay. And then the knight F3, and you'll pick up on it. You'll pick up on it. When I played for 5 grand, was that my money or no? That was okay. That was if I beat them, they were gonna give me 5 grand. But if I lost, they weren't gonna make me pay them 5 grand. So it was like a one-way bet kind of a thing, I guess. So I wasn't actually risking my own money, but I think they would have paid me if I actually won. But I think they were pretty confident I wasn't gonna win. So, which makes sense. Like just knowing the openings against a super strong grandmaster, it's not enough of a handicap. If you watch the other series where I played where I had an extra piece, that's different. Like that's much more. Now I actually have legitimate chances to win. Whereas just the opening prep, like that's not enough. It's not enough. All right, cool guys. Thank you. Thanks everybody for watching. It's going to be a shorter live stream today just because I have some other things to take care of. Preparing for a tournament and whatnot. So thank you guys, and I will see you next time where we'll pick up part 2, where we'll continue going through it. I did put a link in the description if you want to pick up a copy. Highly recommend it if you want to follow along, but you don't have to. Totally up to you if you want to do that or not. Thank you guys. I'll see you next time. Thanks, Steven. Thanks, Rob. As always, good to see you guys. Appreciate you.